Alexander stepped into the interrogation room and flinched involuntarily as the escorting officer slammed the door behind him, a sound he could never get used to, despite having been here many times before. As a public defender, regular visits to the police station were part of the job. The room was small, with dull green walls and no windows. His tired, inflamed eyes instantly watered under the cold, flickering light of the mercury lamps, which buzzed monotonously from the low ceiling. With a sigh, Alexander thought how that soft hum had been the unchanging soundtrack of his meetings with clients for the past 22 years. Seated behind a metal table bolted to the floor was a thin, short man in his 50s, dressed in a stretched, threadbare sweater and faded jeans. Alexander introduced himself with a dry, emotionless voice. "Alexander Robin, I've been assigned as your attorney." The man looked up at him with watery eyes filled with despair and fear, pushed far past the breaking point. His gaunt face was marked by bruises on his cheekbones, and his trembling lips betrayed an unbearable mix of hopelessness and impatience. This was not the face Alexander had expected to see on the man arrested that night. The man believed to be the serial killer who had terrorized the city for 6 months. The killer had been dubbed the Stranger by the police. Over that time, he had committed 6 murders. Men, women, children, all ages. He showed no clear pattern or preference. His modus operandi was disturbingly simple. He would break into an apartment at night and crush the skull of a sleeping victim with a heavy, blunt object. Forensic investigators believed it was a length of rebar. He would then vanish without a trace, only to strike again weeks later in a different part of the city. There were strange details in the case. No signs of forced entry. Victims always found in their beds, in their underwear, leading investigators to believe they had been killed in their sleep. And surveillance footage from elevators, hallways, and street cameras would always mysteriously black out when the killer should have appeared. That morning, Alexander had been woken by a phone call. On the other end was the excited voice of Kraft, the lead investigator on the Stranger case. "We got the bastard," Kraft had shouted, then quickly explained. The Stranger had attempted a 7th murder that night. He had broken into an apartment where a young woman lay asleep. He struck her once with a piece of rebar, but before he could finish, her husband, returning home late from drinks with friends, found the front door ajar and rushed to the bedroom. There, he caught the Stranger mid-swing. The man was a boxer. He landed a series of powerful blows to the killer's head, knocked him out, tied him up, and called the police. The woman was hospitalized in critical condition. The Stranger was taken into custody. His identity was quickly confirmed, thanks to the massive task force that had been chasing him for months. His name was Victor Garmas, 53 years old, a gas station worker from the outskirts of the city. He had moved from a small northern town 2 years ago, lived in a rented apartment. No relationships. What could have driven him to such brutal, senseless killings remained unknown. Kraft wanted answers, but Garmas, though he had confessed upon arrest, refused to give further details until he had spoken with an attorney. Alexander, as a public defender, represented those who couldn't afford a private lawyer. He disliked the work, mostly because it forced him to compromise his principles too often, but he couldn't turn it down. He liked to pretend he was bound by duty, but in truth, he just needed the money. The job paid little, but it was steady. And now, after Kraft's early call, Alexander had a new client, the Stranger himself, who insisted on speaking with a lawyer before answering a single question. Alexander had quickly thrown on clothes, kissed his sleeping daughter Alice, and called Nina, the sitter who watched her when he was away. Nina promised to be there within half an hour. He jumped into his old Opel and drove to the station. Kraft met him there and escorted him with a guard to the interrogation room, then left him alone with the killer. "I don't have much time," Victor Garmas rasped as Alexander set a folder of documents on the table and sat down. "I'll tell you everything, but you have to promise to deliver a message to my mother." "I had no choice." "That's why you refused to speak with the investigator?" Alexander studied Garmas's face. In the harsh fluorescent light, it seemed to be turning into a wax mask with every passing second. Are you afraid the police will twist your confession? Garmis swallowed hard and nodded. The killers. Caught. Case closed. Once I'm dead, no one will care what I said. They'll just write it off as the ramblings of a madman. Why do you think you're going to die? Garmis leaned closer, and the chains on his handcuffs clinked against the table. He lowered his voice to a whisper. Because I didn't pay the price. I didn't kill that woman, and now he's going to take my life instead. Alexander instinctively leaned back in his chair, distancing himself. His eyes flicked to the corner of the room, where a surveillance camera was mounted to the ceiling. Kraft and the others were watching from the next room. 2 more guards waited outside, just in case the suspect tried anything. He called himself the operator, Garmis said. He made me do it, Alexander frowned. He'd already disliked the idea of defending a serial killer, and now the case was taking a turn for the worse. It seemed Garmis was going to blame everything on an imaginary accomplice. And how exactly did this operator control you? Garmis closed his eyes, visibly exhausted. A painful spasm twisted across his face, and he grimaced. I don't have much time, he whispered. It's better if I start at the beginning. He swallowed again, bracing himself, then continued. 2 years ago, when I was still living in the village, my wife died, hit by a car. We had no children. I couldn't bear to stay in that place anymore. Nothing was holding me there. I moved to the city and got a job at a gas station. My mother stayed behind. She's old. I sent her money regularly. I worked extra shifts, ignored the exhaustion. I started losing weight, but I blamed it on the long hours and poor diet. Until one morning, I vomited black blood. The doctor's diagnosis sounded like a death sentence. Inoperable stomach cancer with metastases in the lungs, bones, and liver. They gave me a couple of months. 6 if I was lucky. I didn't tell my mother. What would be the point? My condition got worse every day. I bought a train ticket back to my village, planning to die there, quietly and forgotten, at the age of 53. But I still had one last shift to work. That night, the gas station was all but deserted, and I stepped outside for some fresh air. Staring at the dark sky, I wondered how much time I had left, a month, maybe a day. That's when I heard the payphone ring. There was an old payphone at the edge of the lot, a useless relic no one had ever bothered to remove. After all, everyone had a cell phone now. I'd assumed it hadn't worked in years. So the ringing surprised me. Who could possibly be calling it in the middle of the night? I don't know what made me pick up, but I did. And I heard my wife's voice. Garmis paused. His cuffed hands trembled, and Alexander, watching closely, was startled by how skeletal they had become, like dried limbs of a mummy. Just moments ago, they had looked normal. It was clear now. Something truly was devouring him from within. And yet, how had this man summoned the strength to crush skulls with a steel bar? Your wife is dead, Alexander finally said, breaking the silence. You said so yourself. There's no way you heard her voice. You're right, Garmis replied, his cheek twitching nervously. Because it wasn't her. It was the operator. He speaks in the voices of the dead. Later, when we began to communicate more often, I begged him not to use her voice anymore. So he switched to my father's. He died 6 years ago. It sounded like the ravings of a madman. Alexander frowned. Not only was the stranger trying to shift blame onto someone else, but now he was clearly setting up an insanity defense. What? A mess. That morning, after Kraft's call, Alexander had assumed this would be an open and shut case, a formality. The bastard had all but confessed. But now, I wanted to hang up. I thought it was a sick joke, Garmis continued, ignoring Alexander's sour expression. But the operator offered me healing, in exchange for some small and easy tasks, as he called them. What kind of tasks? Garmis's face darkened. First, he told me to pick up a brick lying nearby and bludgeon the stray mutt that always hung around the station at night. And you did it? Would you have done otherwise? Garmis fixed Alexander with a sharp, almost accusatory glare. Someone speaking with my dead wife's voice offered me a cure. Wouldn't you be tempted? I don't know what came over me. Desperation, maybe. Or rage at the whole damn world. Maybe I figured the cancer had reached my brain and I was hallucinating. Whatever it was. I called the dog over. And I hit it. Several times. It didn't even have time to yelp. Then, the miracle happened. I felt a surge of strength. Like the disease had loosened its grip. Garmus closed his eyes, and for a split second, Alexander thought he caught the flicker of a dreamy smile on the man's cracked lips. It made his stomach turn dot, but it didn't last long. Garmus went on after a pause. A few minutes later, the pain came back. My stomach burned. I could barely stand. Then the phone rang again. The operator told me full healing was possible, but only if I completed more tasks. If I paid the price, Dot. What do you mean by that? Alexander asked, frowning. Garmus seemed not to hear him, or simply ignored the question. He went on in a hollow voice. He always contacted me through the same payphone. At first, he only asked me to kill stray dogs. For some reason, he hated them. I followed his orders, reluctantly. But each time, I felt better. Not cured, not yet, but stronger. More alive. This all sounds unbelievable. But let's say it's true, Alexander sighed, pressing his fingers to the bridge of his nose. The humming of the fluorescent lamps was inside his skull now, splitting it from within. Let's get to the point. Why did you start killing people? Garmus hunched over, his eyes downcast. He swallowed. It looked painful, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. One day, the operator gave me a new task. He gave me an address, an apartment number. The door would be unlocked. I was to kill a girl who had just come home drunk from a party. Later, I realized he somehow always knew which homes had been left unlocked by forgetful tenants. I refused. I refused to pay. That night, the pain came back with a vengeance. I vomited blood, I screamed. My stomach, my bones, it was like fire inside me. I crawled back to the payphone and begged him to let me kill a dog instead. But he said no. That was no longer enough. Now, I had to kill a human. Alexander looked at the man with barely hidden disgust. A calculating monster, willing to slaughter innocent people just to save his own skin. If he was telling the truth. And that was still a big if. His story was far too outlandish. With each word, Garmus seemed to decay before Alexander's eyes. His eyes were sinking into shadowy sockets, his skin yellowing and shrinking like old parchment, and his breath, sweet and putrid, made Alexander instinctively lean back to escape its stench. Still, Garmus went on, his voice feverish and broken. I began to kill, to stay alive. You can't imagine how badly I wanted to live. The possibility of a cure, it made everything feel meaningful again. All I had to do was obey the operator. His shoulders trembled as he broke into a soundless sob. And now you've failed, Alexander said coldly. The confession nauseated him, but his instincts told him to play along. The woman survived. You were caught. Garmus lifted his head, grinning. Bitterly, I didn't pay, so now I'll die. Please, just tell my mother I never wanted to kill those people. I had no choice. That he fell silent, eyes pleading. Alexander considered his next move. If there was even a shred of truth in the story, there were many questions left unanswered. Who, or what, was the operator? How had he found Garmus? Why? Only the payphone? He didn't get to ask. Garmus suddenly began to tremble violently. His eyes rolled back, and a dry, hacking cough racked his body. Bloody mucus sprayed from his mouth, followed by frothy pink foam. With a dreadful, rasping gasp, he collapsed to the floor, seizing in a final spasm. Guard. Alexander jumped from his chair, panicked, rushing to his client. But what could he do? How do you help someone dying right in front of you? The door burst open. Kraft stormed in with two officers close behind. They'd clearly seen everything. On the surveillance feed, their shocked faces showed they were just as terrified as Alexander. What the hell happened? Kraft shouted, kneeling beside the body. Garmus lay motionless, mouth bloody, eyes glassy and fixed on the ceiling. Alexander stared down at him in horror. In the short span of their conversation, the man had transformed, from an exhausted but living criminal into a withered corpse. A shriveled husk wrapped in sickly yellow skin. A grotesque shell of a human being, consumed by disease, or something else. Garmis's sudden death sent a wave of panic through the police station. While the forensics team and coroner examined the body, Kraft questioned Alexander. When the lawyer mentioned the mysterious operator who allegedly guided Garmis's actions, Kraft scoffed. He'd seen plenty of killers claim insanity over the years. Still, he ordered a background check. 30 minutes later, the team reported back. The gas station payphone had been officially disconnected 11 months ago, well before the stranger committed his first murder. Kraft had no doubt that Victor Garmis was the stranger. His fingerprints matched those found at multiple crime scenes. The bastard hadn't even bothered to wear gloves. His bizarre confession was just the desperate delusion of a cornered man, either insanity or a last-ditch ploy to escape. Punishment. It didn't matter. The killer was dead. The city could breathe again. Alexander left the station drained and shaken. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, trying to suppress the tremor in his hands. Outside the windows of his battered Opel, the wet streets and faceless buildings slid past under the bleak November sky. Shadows, mud, people bundled against the cold. His mind spun with thoughts, fragments bubbling up and bursting like boiling water. Home. He paid Nina and thanked her for watching Alice all day. She missed you, the caretaker said, pausing at the door with a kind smile. I saw it in her eyes. She's asleep now. Alexander nodded silently and closed the door behind her. He entered his daughter's room. Alice lay in bed, eyes closed, perfectly still. It was as if she hadn't moved all day. Of course, Nina had probably repositioned her several times to prevent bed sores on her frail, emaciated frame. He stepped closer, heart aching at the sight of the diaper pack on the nightstand and the bottle with a rubber nipple. 2 years had passed since the car crash, the one that killed his wife and left Alice paralyzed. And yet, he still hadn't grown used to the stale air and soiled sheets that defined their lives now. He touched her cold hand resting on the blanket. She couldn't feel it, but he believed it mattered, letting her know, even in sleep, that he was there, that her father was always with her, that he would never leave her. He whispered goodnight, then retreated to his room, collapsing into the armchair with a weary sigh. On the coffee table lay a packet of pumpkin seeds. He liked to snack on them while watching TV. His hand reached for the packet and froze. Garmis's voice echoed in his mind. All you have to do is obey the operator. Alexander leaned back, staring at the ceiling. So many of Garmis's details mirrored his own life. Both had lost their wives in car accidents. And if Garmis had been left with a terminal illness, Alexander had been left with a daughter, paralyzed, lifeless, without hope. She would never walk, never marry, never hear her children laugh. She had no future. And as he drifted into sleep, Alexander thought, I would do anything, to give Alice her life back. He awoke to the sound of a phone ringing. Jerking upright, dazed, his neck and back stiff, he blinked into the darkness. The city had fallen silent. Night had crept into every corner of the apartment. The ringing came again, and only now did Alexander realize it wasn't coming from inside. It was coming from outside. Through the open window, the sound echoed off the empty street. He approached the window. Across the road, beside the building opposite his, stood a payphone booth, shattered glass, rusting frame. He'd always assumed it didn't work. But now, it was ringing. He stepped out into the night. The empty street glowed amber under the streetlights. Slowly, dreamlike, he walked toward the booth. The phone kept ringing. For a moment, it felt like he was the only one left in the world, the only soul able to hear that otherworldly sound. The cable beneath the phone dangled, severed. It couldn't be ringing. And yet, it was. He hesitated, then picked up the receiver. Hello? A voice answered, his wife's voice. Hello, Alexander. Are you ready to pay the price?